The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 18. The Secret Which Enabled the Kahunas to Perform the Miracle of Instant Healing. Instant healing is a miracle in terms of religion and is something before which we stand in awe, not understanding how such healing is performed or by what agency or under what determining conditions. We can only say, God did it. Most miracles are supposed to come in answer to prayer. To pray effectively, one is thought to need to be pure, else the prayer will not be answered. However, those we consider purest and most holy usually get no better answers to their prayers than the worldly. This state of affairs has plagued theologians and laymen alike for many years. It was evident that something was missing in the philosophy, but no one could decide just what. Even prayers to the saints, to request them to pray to God for us, and the practice of all Christians of addressing their prayers to God in the name of Jesus, have resulted in no better scores. The first glimmer of light on the age-old problem came from the discovery of mesmerism. This would seem very odd at first glance, but not so odd on remembering the way religions tend to crystallize into inflexible dogmas and rebuff any slightest effort to change rituals, beliefs, or theories. Mesmerism was a healing agency of sorts, but soon after its discovery, Mesmer's followers were driven by their many failures to look for other measures to augment treatment by the transfer of vital force alone. In Europe and America, they began to experiment. Dr. Freud eventually discovered the secret of the subconscious and of the nature of suggestion, although he was far from understanding, as did the Kahunas on the opposite side of the world, that the low self was a separate and independent spirit, and that suggestion was the planting of thought forms in the low self and the causing of them to be accepted and acted upon. Surprising as it was that Freud came this close to rediscovering the ancient psychological lore, it is even more surprising to find that some years earlier, an American watchmaker named Phineas Parkhurst Quimby turned to the use of mesmerism in healing and discovered the Kahuna's high self and high voltage of vital force. Had the two men lived in the same land and had their studies been combined, they might have reconstructed the basics of miraculous healing. However, they worked apart, and the discoveries of each remained short of the mark. The story of Freud is fairly well known, but that of Quimby is not. The latter's one authentic history is to be found in Horatio W. Dresser's book, The Quimby Manuscripts. Quimby learned mesmerism from a traveling Frenchman around the year 1840 in New England. He gave exhibitions here and there, doing healing on the side. His favorite subject was a young man named Lucius Berkman, Burkman. Lucius, when under mesmeric influence, would announce that he could see the cause of a patient's illness and would then prescribe a remedy, usually medicinal. The results were uncertain at best. However, with practice, Lucius improved, or the mesmerist improved, or both. In any event, the lad had increasingly frequent moments of strange lucidity. He had long been able to see things at a distance, but now he came to catch glimpses of the future. One day, while mesmerized, he said unexpectedly to Quimby, "I can see your kidneys. They are wasting away, but if you will come here and let me place my hands over them, I can heal you." Quimby had been suffering for some time from kidney trouble. Willing to try the experiment, he allowed Lucius to place his hands over his kidneys. After a time, the hands were removed, and the lad declared the cure complete. And insofar as Quimby could see, it was complete. All pains and symptoms vanished. This instant healing of his own painful condition greatly impressed Quimby. He became convinced that Lucius had touched some invisible and unknown source of healing, and he argued that what his subject could touch, he should be able to touch. He set about experimenting, displaying fine persistence and a touch of real genius. From the records of his work, it appeared that, with considerable expenditure of time and effort, he eventually learned to make contact with the thing, capital T-H-I-N-G, that Lucius had found, and to get it to heal now and again at his request. He was unable to learn what the thing was, but sensed a presence at times of contact. The presence did the healing almost miraculously and impressed him as being the very embodiment of wisdom. Knowing no other name for it and feeling that it was too personal and close by far to be God, he took to calling it simply the wisdom. His method of contacting the wisdom was based on a silent call or prayer. It was a method learned after much practice. When contact was made, it was accompanied by a sense of great force or power, which was used in healing. This he came to call the power. Little by little, Quimby learned to work better with the wisdom and its power. He learned that he could sit beside a patient and silently ask the wisdom to diagnose the case and do the healing. He was given to how, by some inward process of mind, what the course of the healing would be. Sometimes the healing was to extend over a period of several days, and he was told how the patient would feel from day to day. The patient might be much worse on the morrow, but completely healed on the day after. Often he sensed the message that a patient could not be cured, and it was always a wonder to him that anything should lay beyond the healing power of the wisdom. He searched his mind for possible reasons and decided that mesmeric suggestion had possibly been given inadvertently by doctors when they had diagnosed the ills of patients who later came to him uncured. In an effort to counteract the suspected suggestive influence, In an effort to counteract this suspected suggestive influence, he taught his patients to believe that the disease itself had been caused by the suggestion of the doctors. While this teaching was blatantly illogical, it seemed to get results, and so was continued. In this step, he seemed to have anticipated a trend beginning to appear now only in the post-World War II days, the trend toward the practice of giving the patient a fictitious or artificial complex and causing him to believe that it is the source of his ills. This artificial complex is then drained off, and cures often result. Not yet satisfied, the inveterate experimenter sought for ways by which he could use the patient's deeply fixed religious beliefs to help the healing. Noting that logic was not demanded by most of his patients, he soberly propounded to them a doctrine that God, being himself perfect, could have created no imperfect things in his creation. For this reason, all disease and all troubles and imperfections must be creations of the human mind, and therefore unreal, impermanent, and imaginary. It followed that once you could come to know and believe the great truth, his healing would be bound to follow. The patients were urged to deny the reality of their ills, and were helped in the denials by mesmeric suggestion. This was a really amazing angle of attack on the fixed beliefs of the low and middle selves. He got around the ordinary guilt or sin complexes, even when not fully aware of their nature, by including all of the patient's sins and guilts with the other evil and imaginary things created by the human mind. When all imperfect things were denied actuality during the treatment, the guilt complexes were automatically included and rendered inactive in causing disease. The term telepathy had not yet been coined, but the phenomenon was known as rapport. Quimby found that after once contacting a patient, he could follow him by the same means by which he kept in touch or rapport with a mesmeric subject. He also found that he could do this in this way send healing suggestions, obtain reports on the progress of the healing, and even seem to furnish a channel by which the wisdom could use its power to heal. This form of healing he dubbed absent treatment. As his practice grew, Quimby wrote out his explanations of the perfection of God and the unreality of all imperfections. He elaborated on the explanations from time to time and had several copies to lend to patients to study and to read over and over until they came to accept the doctrine. One of his patients was Mrs. Patterson, and in brackets it says here, later Eddy, E-D-D-Y. She was healed, but her old nervous afflictions had a way of returning, and the treatment would have to be repeated. She became very familiar with Quimby's methods and his written explanations of his doctrines. Quimby died in 1865, and Mrs. Patterson's spinal and nervous affliction again returned, but with no healer to whom she could turn. In her efforts to use his system to heal herself, she was successful, and it is to be noted without benefit of mesmeric suggestion. Seeing that the system would work with only the Quimby doctrines of the unreality of evils as its basis, she began to elaborate the doctrines, to teach others to heal, and to organize a new cult, which she called Christian Science. To the original doctrine of Quimby, she added the idea of malicious animal magnetism, which, because of the lack of a working knowledge of the complex, was forced to cover a multitude of otherwise unexplained healing difficulties. And then it says in brackets, under this heading also came all the difficulties caused by spirit attacks on the living, even if not recognized as such. Close bracket. Quimby's teaching that all disease was the result of bad human thinking was partly right. The resulting denial of all physical matter and existence was most preposterous, but could not be avoided if the first premise was made to work in a healing system devoid of a full knowledge of the complex and the methods of dealing with it. Christian Science, perforce, remained illogical in this respect, but the concept was one that could be readily grasped, and by repeated readings of the instruction books, the low self could be brought to accept the belief in the unreality of all things physical. It was a system that worked sufficiently well in the hands of practitioners who learned to touch the wisdom and power to attract many followers. Unfortunately, because the system is so incomplete, its failures are as notable as its successes. To become an accepted practitioner, one must develop what amounts to a deep fixation of belief in the doctrine. This makes it all but impossible for new ideas to gain consideration. And while it's probably impossible for practitioners of Christian Science to to accept in any slightest way the more complete system of the Hunas, it is to be seen that as a body the practitioners have made the nearest approach to the high magic that has been made in the West. Many have learned to make contact with the high self, call it what they may. Many have learned to make the correct thought form prayer and to hold the thought through thick and thin and with fine faith. Without being aware of it, they may furnish the high self sufficient vital force to use in materializing the future. Let me start the sentence again. Without being aware of it, they may furnish the high self sufficient vital force to use in materializing in the future the healed or financially bettered condition of the patient. Absent treatment has taught many the trick of telepathic connection with patients, and so has enabled them to send the patients thought forms of healing. If they could also learn to drain off the guilt and related complexes through the use of rituals and physical stimuli accompanied with a projected set of thought forms and proper enforcing charge of vital force as suggestion, their success might be greatly enhanced. As a final touch, they might study the methods of countering spirit attack and obsession. Another cult came into being as a direct result of Quimby's discoveries and teachings. This was New Thought, capital N, capital T, New Thought. This loosely organized group had various branches and leaders. Almost at the beginning, the illogical doctrine of the unreality of matter was dropped, and attention was centered on an idea borrowed from India and promoted largely by Judge Troward, Troward. The idea was that if one holds the thought of what is desired, one exerts a form of suggestive influence over a universal subconscious, which is forced to materialize the things or conditions represented in the thought forms. Affirmations or positive statements of the here and now reality of the desired condition became popular. Few practitioners developed, and it was generally a case of every man for himself. Results were surprisingly good considering the small segment of magic which was used. Theosophy, which had borrowed the thought-holding and thought-form theories from India, largely through the agency of Madame Blavatsky, also borrowed the doctrines of karma and reincarnation, the result being that little attempt was made to heal either body or purse. It is plain to see that modern religious thought has been leaning towards the assimilation of discoveries of psychology, but has been too prone to crystallization to remain sufficiently fluid to keep up with the psychological discoveries. Nothing gets hardening of the arteries as fast as a religion, once its book has been written and its dogmas established. Among the revealed religions of the last century, we find Mormonism and, I don't know how to pronounce this, OAHSPA, OASPE, I would say, but OAHSPE. I've never seen that word written anywhere before. Mormonism contained nothing superior in the line of magic to what is to be found in the older Christianity. OASPE, on the other hand, is tantalizing in its hint of hidden magical meanings and mechanisms buried in what appears on the surface to be a history of all men and all gods under a supreme God since the time of creation. In many ways, The teachings of the Owaspe Bible agree with that of the ancient Huna, and because of the intricate and yet not so completely understood teachings along several lines of psychological and scientific thought, it has not yet crystallized its dogmas. It is possible that members of this group may yet do yeoman service in running experimental checks on Huna beliefs, theories, and practices. If the prophecies contained in the Owaspe Bible are fulfilled, it is certain that men will again learn to cooperate with high beings for healing and other purposes, as well as to receive guidance in many things of personal, national, and world importance. Huna lore throws a great light on the moot subject of faith. Christians and other religionists have speculated endlessly on the exact nature of faith. It was taught that faith was necessary if prayer was to be answered. Even a small amount of faith would be enough. On the surface of the matter, faith is complete belief. However, we now learn from the Kahunas that belief on the part of the middle self is not enough. That alone is not faith. Only when the low self also believes that there is a genuine and workable faith. No. Only when the low self also believes is there genuine and workable faith. This is simply a different way of saying that if the low self has a fixation or even slightly complex, stubbornly held belief, which is contrary to the one held at the moment by the middle self, the low self will refuse to obey orders. For instance, if I, the middle self, am convinced that telepathy is a possibility and set out to teach the low self to send and receive telepathic or thought form messages, I can succeed only if the low self has not, earlier in my life, been taught that telepathy is a figment of superstition. It is very difficult for the individual to find out whether or not he has a fixed belief of a certain kind lodged in his low self. As we are unaware of such fixations, we naturally conclude that we have none. The test is best applied by watching the results we get after a period of faithful daily practice. If there are no results at all, hunt for a complex. In the exercise of telepathic abilities, whether communication is between the high self, another person, or a departed spirit and a living person, there is one very helpful feature in the fact that flowing vital force causes a tingling sensation. This tingle is a great assistance in determining whether or not the low self has obeyed the order and has made contact for us. Most people are familiar with the tingle or the raising the hair that comes when ghostly presences are sensed. It is to be supposed that when a spectral visitor touches us with its shadowy body, it draws from us some vital force, and that this movement of vital force causes the tingle. Very often I have begun to talk to my friends about spirits of the departed, and I have soon felt a tingle, as if thinking about dead friends has called their spirits back to me. The high self contacts us of its own accord in our sleep, making use, so the Kahunas thought, of the connecting cord of shadowy body material. Our thoughts of the day, with our plans, hopes, fears, loves, and hates, are examined and taken, perhaps as duplicated thought forms. We do not know the exact mechanism used, and at the same time, vital force is taken. This vital force is stepped up to the high voltage and is used by the high self to construct a shadowy body which will materialize as part of our future. Such thought forms were mentioned by the Kahunas as seeds, and were symbolized as seeds which were vitalized by the high self and grew into actualities of the future. This contact made during sleep is often to be recognized by a tingling, usually in the region of the sacral plexus, and it comes frequently at the moment of falling asleep, or even before that if we are relaxed. The high self not only takes from us vital force, it returns a compensating force. Little is known of this compensating force, except that it is vital to our health and well-being. I have often settled myself for a nap in the afternoon and have felt the tingle as I dozed off. Immediately after feeling it, I have felt rested and refreshed and ready to rise and go on with the work of the day. If our low self has a shame or a guilt complex and repels the approach of the high self during sleep, we face disaster. We become lost souls without benefit of higher guidance. We lose our vitality and become ill. As the Kahunas would say, our path is blocked to the high self. Happily for us, the high self seems able in due time to force a contact. When sick or in trouble, most of us pray and so open the door to help, and we return to normal. If, however, the complex is too strong, the resulting illness or accident may end with death. The path must be kept open.